Nous sommes permis. In the bustling heart of the medieval world, long before digital screens and endless streams of entertainment, people still yearn to be amused, distracted, and amazed. But their ways of finding fun might surprise you. Picture yourself waking up not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the distant clang of bells from the village church and the rattle of wooden carts trundling down muddy roads. Life was short, laborious, and uncertain, yet even amidst toil and turmoil, humans have always found ways to chase joy. Step back in time with me. Imagine you're a peasant in 14th century England. You've spent most of your days bent over in the fields, your hands rough from gathering turnips, your back aching from countless hours beneath the unforgiving sun. Your meals are plain, coarse bread, maybe some porridge, the occasional onion or hunk of cheese. Your shoes are worn, your home smoky and dim. Yet tonight, for once, something special awaits. The festival has come. The arrival of a festival or fair was the highlight of the year. It brought colour to grey lives, excitement to weary hearts. Entire villages would transform into stages for celebration. Long tables were laid out with whatever food could be spared, musicians tuned their fiddles and lutes, and laughter rang out into the night. Even the church, often the stern enforcer of moral codes, allowed a few indulgences, at least for a little while. For nobles, entertainment took a grander form. Lavish banquets lit by flickering candlelight were held in cold stone halls hung with heavy tapestries. There they watched jesters tumble and jest, troubadours sing of honour and heartbreak, and fire-eaters perform dazzling feats. But even the commoners had their diversions. Street performers roamed the marketplaces, performing tricks with wooden cups or breathing fire from homemade concoctions. Puppet shows offered moral tales or slapstick comedy, drawing children and adults alike into their miniature worlds. Then there were the more peculiar pursuits. Some forms of medieval fun feel downright bizarre by modern standards. Take, for instance, the sport of pig chasing, a spectacle where villagers would grease up a pig and turn it loose in the streets, with participants slipping and sliding as they scrambled to catch it. Or consider the tradition of mock battles, staged more for chaos than skill, where grown men with padded clubs reenacted legendary fights or local feuds to the cheers of a drunken crowd. These weren't polished performances. They were rowdy, unpredictable, and deeply loved. And what about the darker side of amusement? Public executions, for instance, were grim spectacles, but undeniably popular. Crowds would gather not just from the nearby town, but from neighbouring villages drawn by the promise of drama, justice, or vengeance. They would stand shoulder to shoulder, children atop shoulders, as criminals were led to their fate. Some cheered, some prayed, many watched with a mix of horror and fascination. It was macabre theatre, an unsettling yet socially accepted form of community gathering. Still, not all pleasures were so violent. People danced. Oh, how they danced. At harvest festivals, weddings, or even just on warm evenings, villagers would form circles and lines, stomping in rhythm to the beat of drums or the melody of a pipe. Dances were often communal, with everyone from toddlers to grandmothers joining in. The steps were simple, the joy contagious. For a few moments, worries could be forgotten. Seasonal events provided regular bursts of festivity. May Day brought floral crowns and flirtatious games. Midsummer fires lit up the night sky. Christmas, though a religious holiday, was often paired with drinking, feasting, and silly games that skirted the edges of propriety. And Lent, with its fasting and solemnity, was often preceded by days of wild revelry, an ancient acknowledgement that fun must sometimes be indulged before duty takes hold again. Let's not forget storytelling. In an age without novels or cinema, the travelling bard was a treasured guest. These wandering wordsmiths spun epic sagas by firelight, tales of doomed lovers, noble quests, and monstrous beasts. People would sit in awed silence, the flickering flames painting shadows on eager faces, as the storyteller's voice carried them far beyond their village. A good tale could make a night feel magical. Children, too, found joy in their own ways. Games with hoops, balls made of stitched leather, or simple tag-like chases kept them active and amused. They made toys from twigs, dolls from scraps, and played make-believe in haylofts or castle ruins. Their laughter, clear and unburdened, echoed down the centuries. Yet behind all these entertainments lay a deeper truth. Medieval fun wasn't just about passing time. It was about resilience. It was about resisting despair in a world filled with disease, war, and loss. These celebrations, however humble or strange, reminded people that life held more than hardship. They brought communities together, affirmed identities, and allowed people to feel, if only for a moment, free. So as you settle in tonight, maybe under soft blankets or beside the glow of a bedside lamp, think back to those villagers of long ago. Their world was harder, their days rougher, but they too craved joy. They too needed distraction. They too danced, laughed, told stories, and watched puppet shows under a sky full of stars. And perhaps, just perhaps, what they did for fun wasn't so different from us after all. 0701 While festivals and fairs brought colour to the calendar, daily life in the medieval world still found room for small personal pleasures, tiny sparks of joy tucked between routines of survival. Fun wasn't always about grand events. Often it lived in the quiet, unexpected corners of an otherwise demanding day. Take, for instance, the village tavern. More than just a place to drink, it was the medieval version of a community centre. People gathered not just to drown their troubles in ale, but to swap news, sing rowdy songs, and share in communal laughter. Some nights you might hear a local trying their hand at a bawdy limerick, or a dramatic recitation from memory. Other evenings brought impromptu musical duels, two fiddlers attempting to outdo each other, while tankards slammed against tables in rhythm. The tavern was loud, imperfect, but undeniably alive. For those more inclined to cerebral diversions, board games and dice were a popular pastime. Backgammon, called tables back then, was widely played across social classes. Games of chance involving carved bones or pebbles provided moments of excitement, even if the stakes were modest. And while gambling was often frowned upon by church authorities, that didn't stop countless villagers from tossing dice behind barns or in shadowy alcoves. In noble courts, entertainment took a more refined, though no less bizarre, form. One such curiosity was the court fool, a fixture in aristocratic households. But contrary to modern assumptions, fools weren't always just comic relief. Many were astute observers, sharp-witted and insightful, capable of poking fun at lords and ladies in ways no one else dared. Draped in mismatched colours and jingling with bells, they served as a strange mix of social mirror and chaos agent. Their riddles, jests, and slapstick routines offered laughter, yes, but also critique, often disguised in absurdity. Another aristocratic amusement was falconry, a blend of sport, prestige, and patience. Trained birds of prey, especially falcons and hawks, were used to hunt game, and owning such animals was a clear status symbol. The rituals of falconry were meticulous. The glove, the hoods, the whistle commands. Nobles would spend hours on horseback scanning the skies, hoping for a successful dive and a clean kill. But falconry wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Many found deep beauty in the grace of flight, in the bond between human and bird. For women, especially noble women, entertainment often took quieter forms, though no less meaningful. Embroidery and weaving weren't only duties, they were meditative arts, spaces of shared stories and whispered songs. In circles of spinning wheels and needlework, gossip was exchanged, legends retold, and laughter passed from hand to hand like a bowl of fresh berries. And then there were riddles, strange, clever little puzzles, passed down orally or scribbled in margins of manuscripts. Some were deeply philosophical, others were scandalously suggestive. Riddles offered a game of intellect and innuendo, challenging listeners to think, laugh, and blush in equal measure. One could imagine monks and maidens alike trying to solve them in cloisters or kitchens, giggling over double meanings. In the countryside, nature itself became a playground. Children climbed trees, chased geese, and splashed in creeks. Adults took part in seasonal competitions, like log tossing, stone lifting, or archery contests. Maypole dancing brought everyone into the village square, winding ribbons and legs in tangled joy. And in the dead of winter, people carved sleds or simply slid down icy hills on their cloaks, shouting and tumbling like children regardless of age. But not all medieval fun was rooted in innocence or lightheartedness. Some amusements veered toward the grotesque, the painful, even the cruel. Consider bear baiting. In town centres, bears, often chained or muzzled, were set upon by trained dogs. Crowds gathered to watch the clash. Blood was expected, so was cheering. It was a brutal sport, one that drew both commoners and nobles. To modern eyes it seems barbaric, but to many then it was simply thrilling. Other blood sports included cockfighting and dogfights. Gambling was common. So was drinking, and when a favourite animal won, the crowd would erupt in joy, as though they'd triumphed personally. When it lost, boos, jeers, and sometimes tears followed. These spectacles served as release valves. In a world where death came swiftly, and justice could be arbitrary, seeing violence meted out in controlled arenas gave people a strange sense of order, and perhaps fleeting power over their own chaotic fates. And then there were public humiliations. Stocks and pillories were forms of punishment, yes, but they also doubled as public spectacle. Villagers gathered to throw rotten vegetables at petty thieves, or shout jeers at gossipers and debtors. Children laughed. Adults gossiped. It became a kind of twisted theatre, one where everyone in the audience knew they might one day be the star. Even storytelling could take a dark turn. Tales of ghosts, witches, and demons haunted many a medieval fireside. People loved to be frightened. They told of night terrors, shadowy forests, and creatures that stole babies in the night. These stories weren't just diversions. They were cultural warnings, moral lessons, and group bonding all in one. But fear, like joy, was a communal experience. And in that sense, all these varied entertainments, whether joyous, grotesque, clever, or cruel, fulfilled the same need, to feel something beyond survival. To remind people that, even in a world ruled by plague and politics, one could still laugh, gasp, cheer, or wonder. So tonight, as you settle into your pillow and drift deeper into stillness, imagine the flicker of torchlight on a cobbled square. Hear the strum of a lute, the sudden bark of laughter, the breathless hush before a tale's twist. Somewhere, long ago, someone just like you leaned in, eager to be amused, for a moment, for an evening, for a lifetime. As we continue our quiet walk through the lanes of medieval amusement, it's worth pausing to appreciate how deeply tied fun was to the rhythms of the year. In an age before wristwatches and weekends, time flowed according to the church calendar, the harvest and the light. Life was cyclical, and so too was celebration. Each season brought its own distinct flavor of enjoyment. Spring, with its promise of renewal, was often marked by lively games and flirtatious rituals. May Day, in particular, was a favorite. Villagers would rise early to gather fresh flowers and branches, weaving garlands and decorating doorways. The maypole was raised in the village green, and young men and women danced around it in bright ribbons, their movements twisting together like courtship in motion. There was music, laughter, stolen kisses in the shade, and perhaps a few hushed vows exchanged beneath blossoming trees. Summer brought longer days and lighter hearts. Bonfires blazed on Midsummer's Eve, huge leaping flames meant to ward off evil and ensure a good harvest. People would jump over the fires, a symbol of bravery and luck. Couples sometimes leapt hand in hand, testing fate and the strength of their bond. There were nighttime feasts, and children stayed up late chasing fireflies and listening to whispered tales. Autumn, though tinged with the fatigue of harvest, still held room for joy. The labor was done, the barns were full, and now came the time to feast. Michaelmas and All Hallows' Eve were celebrated with apples, nuts, and cider. Shadows grew longer, and the veil between the living and the dead was thought to thin. People carved faces into turnips, lit candles, and told ghost stories that might raise the hair on your neck. It was a season of gratitude, but also of mystery. Winter, with its long nights and biting cold, called for warmth in every sense. Christmas was a centerpiece of the season, but unlike the quiet reverence we may picture today, medieval Christmas was noisy, messy, and filled with contradictions. Church bells rang out and masses were held, but there was also wild merrymaking. Mummers, masked performers, roamed from house to house, acting out comical or mythic plays. People sang bawdy songs, drank heavily, and feasted on whatever could be spared. In some places, a lord of misrule was appointed, usually a peasant or servant, who presided over the festivities in jest, turning the social order upside down, if only for a few days. During the 12 days of Christmas, social roles blurred. Nobles gave gifts to their servants. Jokes were made at the expense of the powerful. It was all temporary, but it spoke to a deeper human need, to invert the world, if only briefly. Laughter could become rebellion in disguise. Carnival, the riotous celebration before the austerity of Lent, followed a similar pattern. Parades, costumes, satirical songs. It was a last indulgence before 40 days of fasting. People wore masks not just to conceal identity, but to escape it. For a moment, a beggar could become a king, a nun could dance, and rules could be broken with a wink. But not all fun followed the seasons. Some entertainment was more spontaneous, more personal. Courtship itself was often playful. In a world where marriages were frequently arranged, romantic love still found cracks to grow in. Young people found excuses to linger near one another during chores, passed messages through songs or flowers, and carved initials into trees. Love tokens were exchanged, a ribbon, a brooch, a carefully chosen verse. Troubadours and minstrels sang ballads of forbidden love, of knights and ladies separated by duty or distance. These stories, whether true or purely poetic, gave people a language for emotions they weren't always allowed to express. Within the home, families made their own fun. Winter nights were spent around the hearth, with the fire casting flickering shadows on stone walls. Children played finger games or listened to folk tales, repeated for the 100th time. Elders told stories of saints and sinners, of local legends, of great battles and small miracles. Games of memory and logic were played aloud. Tongue twisters, moral puzzles, and playful riddles passed the hours. What has a mouth but never speaks, one might ask? What runs but never walks? Such questions were simple, but they brought smiles and sparked thought. Even chores could turn into games. Singing while spinning, racing to complete tasks, or challenging a friend to balance a bucket without spilling. These were little ways to bring joy into the ordinary. Laughter, after all, makes the burden lighter. And still, in monasteries and abbeys, there were more subtle pleasures. Though monks and nuns lived disciplined lives, many found deep enjoyment in copying texts, tending gardens, or composing music. Illuminated manuscripts, those intricate gold-leafed creations, were often filled with tiny jokes in the margins, snails dueling with knights, monkeys playing flutes, or rabbits chasing hunters. In the quiet corners of the scriptorium, a dry humor peeked through the sacred. Even in prayer there was beauty. Gregorian chants resonated through stone chapels, voices rising and falling in perfect harmony. To sing with others, to lose yourself in sound, it was its own kind of joy. In the cities too, life had its amusements. Markets bustled not just with commerce, but with performance. Vendors shouted clever rhymes to sell their wares. Pickpockets worked the crowd with subtle hands and theatrical flair. Acrobats tumbled through narrow lanes. Fortune-tellers offered glimpses into futures both hopeful and ominous. Life was loud, fragrant, unpredictable, and always, always in motion. Through it all, fun in the medieval world was not a luxury. It was a necessity. In times of illness, hunger, or war, it became a survival tool. A laugh could chase away despair. A story could restore meaning. A dance could remind aching bodies they were still alive. So as you lie there, listening to this story fold softly around you, know that fun was never absent from history. It simply wore different clothes. It sang different songs. But it was always there, beating quietly beneath the hardships, waiting for a reason to rise. Perhaps it still is. 71 5 far. As our journey through medieval merriment begins to slow, we find ourselves returning, gently, to one simple truth. The human longing for joy is as old as breath itself. No matter the century, no matter the hardship, people have always reached for moments of light, however fleeting, however small. And in the later medieval centuries, this longing didn't fade. It only became more inventive. With the growth of towns and the rise of guilds, entertainment evolved alongside urban life. Guild festivals became events of civic pride, complete with processions, banners, and elaborate performances. Each craft, whether bakers, weavers, or stonemasons, had its own symbols, colours, and patron saints. These processions weren't just parades, they were public affirmations of belonging. In many places, the mystery play emerged, dramatized versions of biblical stories performed on wagons that moved from street to street. Town squares transformed into open-air theatres, and entire communities came out to watch. These plays weren't simply religious, they were vivid, dramatic, and sometimes surprisingly humorous. Noah's wife might refuse to board the ark, berating her husband in front of the crowd. Demons might tumble and shriek with comic exaggeration. These performances weren't just sermons in disguise, they were moments of shared imagination, where sacred and silly could meet. Elsewhere, the rise of universities brought new kinds of intellectual play. Students, often barely older than teenagers, debated philosophy and Latin by day, and engaged in elaborate drinking games by night. Academic life in cities like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna was rigorous, but not without release. Satirical poems and clever word games filled student notebooks, and dormitories rang with laughter over coded insults and sly pranks. And while many of these pleasures were rooted in male-dominated spaces, women too carved out their own forms of joy. In convents, nuns wrote music, poetry, and spiritual plays. They tended gardens, kept bees, and shared stories under cloistered arches. Some corresponded with nobles and scholars. Others recorded their visions and dreams in glowing, lyrical prose. These were not idle lives. They were creative, curious, and alive with quiet celebration. In rural villages, women led seasonal rituals, singing ancient songs, passing herbal knowledge, weaving wreaths. They told stories to children at dusk, painted eggs at springtime, and traced patterns into bread before baking. In their hands, daily life became art. By the 14th and 15th centuries, new art forms began to emerge as well. Illuminated manuscripts became more playful, filled with hidden figures and surreal creatures tucked into the margins. Painters explored colour and perspective with increasing freedom. Even in cathedrals, soaring monuments of devotion, gargoyles grinned down with exaggerated glee. Beauty and humour were no longer separate. They were partners in expression. And then, as now, people laughed at themselves. One beloved medieval tradition was the Feast of Fools, a festival where junior clergy and altar boys were allowed, for one day, to take over religious duties. They dressed in absurd costumes, made mock sermons, and turned solemn rituals into theatrical farce. The church often tried to suppress it, but the tradition persisted, perhaps because it satisfied something essential, the need to laugh at power, at piety, at ourselves. Mock weddings, fake kings, role reversals, these were more than comic relief. They were subtle revolts against the rigid order of the world. Laughter in this context was not trivial. It was transformative. Of course, the medieval world was not always kind to laughter. There were limits. The church preached against excessive mirth. Manuals of behavior warned against noisy laughter, tickling, or comic storytelling. The body was viewed with suspicion. Pleasure was a temptation. But even in the face of such warnings, joy found ways to bloom. Perhaps the most enduring medieval entertainment was simply this: storytelling. Whether in monasteries, marketplaces, or over family hearths, stories passed from mouth to mouth like water from a shared cup. They carried lessons, yes, but also hope, fear, wonder, and humour. Some were long epics of knights and dragons. Others were simple tales of tricksters, lovers, or talking animals. They offered escape, connection, and memory. Many of the stories we still tell today, of witches and saints, of love lost and found, of clever peasants and foolish kings, are echoes of those older tales. They may have changed in shape or tone, but their hearts remain the same. So now, as our exploration draws to a close, let us return to the quiet places. Imagine a young woman spinning wool by candlelight, humming a song her grandmother taught her. A boy pretending to be a knight, his wooden sword worn smooth from play. A monk smiling to himself as he draws a tiny dragon in the margin of a psalter. A crowd laughing in the cold, watching a mummer tumble through a farcical sermon. A baker shaping bread into the face of a saint, just for fun. These are not the grand moments history often records, but they are the ones we live for. The ones that stitched together form the deeper fabric of our past. Fun in the medieval world was not always safe. It could be crude, cruel, or fleeting, but it was also brave. It was defiant. It was necessary. Because in a world of plague and poverty, of war and fear, people still chose to dance, to sing, to joke, to play, and that perhaps is the greatest testament to the human spirit. So tonight, as you rest beneath the hush of your own roof, know that you are part of a long, unbroken line of joy seekers. That laughter lives in every era. That celebration is a kind of resistance, that stories matter, not because they are loud, but because they last. Sleep well, traveller, and may your dreams be filled with songs, games, and 1,000 tiny joys passed from hand to hand across time. 4715 As we move deeper into the fabric of medieval leisure, it becomes clear that the line between fun and belief was often beautifully blurred. Entertainment wasn't always separated from the sacred, quite the opposite. In a time when religion shaped every rhythm of life, many of the games, songs, festivals, and performances people enjoyed were woven directly into the spiritual calendar. Take, for instance, the pageants and processions tied to holy days. These weren't solemn affairs of silence and bowed heads. They were vivid spectacles. Whole communities came together to reenact biblical stories, saints' lives, or tales of miraculous wonder. Costumes were stitched from scraps, masks carved from wood, voices lifted in choral joy or whispered awe. It wasn't uncommon for someone playing the role of a devil to run through the crowd with a pitchfork, children screaming with delighted terror in his wake. Religious drama was a source of pride and excitement. Groups of amateur actors, sometimes called guild players, would spend weeks preparing. Rehearsals were held after long days of labor, with scripts passed hand to hand and lines memorized by candlelight. There was laughter when someone forgot a cue, pride when the crowd applauded, and a deep sense of unity when the final curtain, often just a woolen sheet, fell. Some communities built elaborate hellmouths, huge stage props shaped like monstrous jaws, complete with smoke, fire, and actors playing demons, to drag the sinful into its belly. It was spectacle, yes, but it also stirred the soul. In the medieval world, joy and salvation could dance side by side. In more elite circles, tournaments were another form of religiously tinged entertainment. While often remembered today as noble sport, they were also rich in ceremony. Before the jousts began, knights would attend mass, dedicate their combat to a saint, and receive tokens, perhaps a ribbon or glove, from a lady watching from the stands. Trumpets blared, banners fluttered, the crashing of lances, the roar of the crowd. It was thrilling, dangerous, and deeply symbolic, and yet even the common folk created sacred forms of play. Pilgrimages, for example, were more than just spiritual quests. They were also adventures, opportunities to break routine, see new places, and meet new people. Along the way, pilgrims shared jokes, stories, meals, and songs. Some carried talismans, others performed acts of penance in eccentric ways, crawling on knees, wearing chains, or traveling barefoot. While these acts held spiritual significance, they also drew curious onlookers, and in many towns, pilgrims were welcomed like honored guests, bringing a spark of novelty to otherwise ordinary days. The road itself became a stage. Even devotional objects could become playful. Pilgrim badges sold at shrines were often humorously shaped, a saint with a giant head, a relic container disguised as a fish, or a cheeky nod to a local legend. Collecting these badges was like collecting souvenirs, each one a story pressed in tin. Meanwhile, another form of playful devotion emerged in the form of miracle plays. Unlike biblical pageants, these focused on the lives of saints, often highlighting their trials, temptations, and triumphs. Some plays featured flying angels on wires, mechanical dragons, or gory martyrdom scenes designed to awe and entertain. The message was holy, but the delivery could be theatrical, even thrilling. And then there were folk beliefs, those curious customs passed down not through church edict, but through grandmothers' whispers and farmers' lore. People believed in fairies, spirits, and the power of certain plants or stones. To some, the right herb under a pillow could bring prophetic dreams. A charm carved into a doorway could ward off bad luck. These rituals, while not officially sanctioned, were deeply embedded in daily life, and often accompanied by communal songs, dances, or stories. Seasonal rites tied to fertility, harvest, or weather were full of playful elements. Villagers might dress in leaves, paint their faces, or carry symbols like antlers, eggs, or sheaves of wheat. These weren't just for fun, they were calls to nature, to the divine, to the unseen forces believed to shape the world. Even illness brought its own strange forms of amusement. During outbreaks of plague or sickness, people sometimes turned to laughter as medicine. Traveling jesters were hired to lift spirits. Ridiculous hats were worn. Nonsense songs were sung. It was as though, in the face of despair, people leaned harder into joy, not to forget the danger, but to remind themselves that they still lived. And what of the written word? By the later medieval period, books, once rare and sacred, were becoming more available, at least among the literate elite. But not all were theological. Some were playful, even downright silly. The Carmina Burana, for instance, is a collection of bawdy poems and songs penned by students and monks. It touches on drinking, lust, dice, and the joy of spring. It's irreverent, mischievous, and utterly human. Marginalia, the doodles and notes in the margins of medieval manuscripts, often reveal a hidden layer of humor. Monks might draw little men climbing the letters, animals chasing each other through paragraphs, or even cartoons mocking their fellow scribes. In these quiet rebellions, we see joy etched in ink. In households lucky enough to own books, reading could be a shared entertainment. Families gathered to hear tales of King Arthur, the romance of the rose, or fables where animals taught human lessons. These stories were read aloud by firelight, each word painting pictures on the walls, each pause a space for laughter or thought. Music, too, remained a core part of pleasure. Whether in churches or in taverns, in noble halls or village greens, melodies carried memory and meaning. Minstrels adapted old tunes with new lyrics, adding topical jokes or regional flair. Instruments like the hurdy-gurdy, the lute, the pipe, and the drum created rich textured soundscapes. And even those who couldn't play joined in with clapping, stomping, or humming along. To sing was to belong. To know the words to a common song was to feel part of a larger story. As this tapestry of medieval fun unspools, what becomes clear is not just how people amused themselves, but why. Entertainment wasn't distraction, it was connection. It connected people to each other, to their past, to their gods, and to the rhythms of the world around them. It made sorrow bearable, joy shareable, and life, however uncertain, worth celebrating. So now, as your eyes grow heavier and your breath steadies, picture a torch-lit village square, a soft lute playing, laughter on the breeze. Somewhere, centuries ago, someone just like you was listening to a story, smiling at a joke, or dancing in the dusk. The world has changed, but joy has always sounded the same. Nerusision 5-6. As the curtain begins to fall on our journey through medieval joy, one final truth lingers in the air. Entertainment was not only something people sought, it was something they created, shared, and passed on. Like a story whispered from one firelit night to the next, some of the most enduring forms of medieval fun were those tied to identity and place. Local traditions shaped how communities celebrated, played, and laughed. What one village found hilarious, another might frown upon. Yet across these differences, a shared human impulse connected them all, the desire to mark time, to make meaning, and to feel alive. Consider the unique festivals that flourished in different corners of Europe. In France, the Feast of the Ass celebrated the biblical flight to Egypt by bringing a live donkey into church, where it would bray during hymns while parishioners responded with joyful noise. In parts of Germany, shouting festivals were held, competitions in which villagers would stand in a field and scream at one another across great distances. The loudest or most poetic insults often won. In England, local customs like Hocktide gave people license to playfully capture members of the opposite sex and demand coins for their release. It was flirtation, performance, and economic exchange, all wrapped into one. In Italy, masked balls became popular among the nobility. Beneath masks, social roles dissolved, at least briefly. The daughter of a merchant could speak freely to a nobleman. The shy could become bold, the poor elegant. In these moments, play became transformation. Music and dance continued to evolve. Troubadours and jongleurs brought regional styles with them as they traveled, and their songs adapted to local dialects and humor. The carol, a circle dance accompanied by singing, spread across much of Europe. Its simple repeating steps made it easy for all to join, turning even the most hesitant onlookers into joyful participants. In castles, minstrels performed courtly songs of chivalry and unrequited love. In the streets, drummers and pipers led spontaneous parades. In fields and barns, fiddlers struck up tunes for weddings, harvests, and whenever the mood struck. No excuse was needed to dance, just an instrument and a little space. The art of mimicry was also deeply loved. Some performers, known as mimics or players, specialized in impersonations. They would imitate local officials, clergy, or even animals, exaggerating their voices and movements for comic effect. These acts often treaded close to satire, but their popularity was undeniable. In mimicry, villagers saw reflections of their world, distorted, playful, and revealing. Children, of course, played constantly. They mimicked adults in their games, staging miniature feasts, mock sermons, or pretend trials. They crafted dolls from cloth and wood, raced homemade carts, played handball or wrestling games in the fields. Their laughter rang through narrow alleys, barn lofts, and chapel courtyards, and though toys were often handmade and simple, they held deep meaning. A carved horse passed down from brother to brother, a small flute fashioned from a reed, a wooden spinning top that survived 3 winters. In these objects, imagination took root. Meanwhile, some of the most curious forms of medieval fun blurred the line between amusement and experiment. Think of the medieval love of curiosities, performers with unusual abilities, rare animals, or objects believed to have magical properties. Traveling troupes might include contortionists, sword swallowers, or strongmen. Markets sometimes hosted wonder cabinets, filled with preserved creatures, fossils, or mirrors said to show the future. People paid a few coins to gawk, to speculate, to believe, or not. Astrology also became a source of fascination. Charts were drawn, predictions made. Noblemen consulted astrologers not only for state matters, but also for love, luck, and when best to host a feast. Reading the stars wasn't just spiritual, it was theatrical, sky and story intertwined. And then there was food. Feasting itself was performance. In noble halls, chefs created edible illusions, castles sculpted from sugar, roast animals reassembled and redressed to appear alive, pies that released live birds when cut. At one banquet, a swan was roasted, dressed in its feathers, and served upright on a platter. At another, musicians emerged from an enormous cake. For common folk, food fun was more modest, but no less meaningful. Pancake races, cheese rolling contests, and butter churning games brought laughter to kitchens and greens alike. Even something as simple as carving faces into loaves of bread, or shaping cookies into animals could turn nourishment into joy. Fun, then, was everywhere, threaded through belief, survival, curiosity, and creation. It rose in song, danced in dust, whispered in riddles, and echoed in silence. It was a flicker of rebellion against suffering, a celebration of the absurd, a balm for tired spirits. And though the world was often harsh, medieval people found ways to laugh at it, and at themselves. As we return now from this long, gentle journey, let's remember what we've seen. Not kings or crusades, not battles or borders, but children skipping in the dirt, lovers trading verses, villagers cheering a puppet show, a monk grinning at a marginal doodle, a woman weaving a tale by firelight. History isn't just made by the powerful, it's carried by the playful, the ordinary, the joyful. So tonight, as the hush deepens and your thoughts soften, may you carry with you not only knowledge, but warmth, the knowledge that people, across time, across language, across hardship, have always needed laughter, have always sought beauty, have always told stories, and still do. Good night, and sleep well. As we journey further into the medieval world of wonder, we begin to notice how the threads of fun, ritual, belief, and survival are often so tightly woven that it's nearly impossible to pull them apart. In fact, some of the most unusual and fascinating entertainments of the era sprang from that very blend, where play met purpose and spectacle carried something sacred or strange beneath its surface. Consider the curious case of charivari, also known in some regions as the rough music. At first glance, it might seem like simple mockery, a parade of pots, pans, and loud banging outside someone's home in the dead of night. But it carried layered meaning. A charivari was often staged in response to a marriage deemed inappropriate by community standards. Perhaps a widow remarried too quickly, or a young bride married a much older man. Neighbors would gather with noisemakers, shout insults, and perform satirical skits outside the couple's door. It was raucous and humiliating, but it was also cathartic. In a world with few official channels for protest, these noisy rituals became a kind of social correction, a way for the community to assert its voice. And strangely, it could also be funny. Participants might dress in outlandish costumes, sing bawdy songs, and imitate the newlyweds in exaggerated pantomime. Other community entertainments straddled the line between order and chaos. The Lord of Misrule, a figure appointed during Christmas or Twelfth Night celebrations, symbolized a temporary inversion of authority. He might be a servant elevated to command nobles for a day, or a boy bishop leading prayers. He orchestrated games, mischief, and mock trials. Rules were broken, roles reversed, and hilarity followed. But beneath the laughter was something deeper, a ritual release. By temporarily turning the world upside down, these customs helped reinforce its eventual return to order. People played with the edge of disruption, only to step back into the safety of the known. Mock courts, sometimes called fools' assizes, functioned similarly. In these, entire communities took part in absurd trials, where defendants might be charged with ludicrous crimes like excessive snoring or stealing sunshine. The guilty might be sentenced to kiss a pig, carry a turnip for a week, or wear their clothing backward. The point wasn't punishment, it was unity. These events let people laugh at themselves and each other, breaking down social stiffness through shared absurdity. In universities, particularly in Paris and Oxford, student culture was rich with satire and parody. Entire feasts of the donkey were organized, with fake academic debates held in Latin about subjects like which is superior, beer or wine. Students composed mock sermons sung in gibberish, or mimicked their professors' peculiar habits. These weren't just jokes, they were rituals of release in a world ruled by authority and rote learning. Some towns held Hunger Games of their own, endurance contests in which men competed to go without eating for days. The winner awarded a prize and a feast. Elsewhere, fools' competitions tested who could remain in character the longest, enduring insults, pies to the face, or icy baths with unwavering absurdity. Medieval fun also found form in the grotesque and the uncanny. Traveling sideshows, often called wonder wagons, roamed the countryside, bringing with them human curiosities, trained animals, or magical relics. One might pay a coin to see a bearded lady, a child who sang like a bird, or a two-headed goat. These weren't only displays, they were stories in motion, invitations to believe in the marvelous, or question what was real. In larger towns, automata, early mechanical figures powered by water, wind, or weight, were occasionally displayed. Imagine a wooden angel flapping its wings at the stroke of midnight, or a mechanical knight drawing his sword to mark the hour. These contraptions were rare, expensive, and mysterious, but when seen, they created awe, a feeling not unlike magic. Another peculiar form of fun was the medieval love of riddles and intellectual play. Riddle contests were sometimes held in courts, monasteries, or during feast gatherings. Participants would pose questions cloaked in metaphor. I have a head, a tail, but no body. What am I? Or, I run but have no feet. I murmur but never speak. These were more than puzzles. They were performances. The ability to craft or solve riddles was considered a sign of wit, wisdom, and even moral insight. In certain traditions, people gathered to listen to public readings of romances or adventure tales, but with a twist. Audience members were expected to interrupt, shout commentary, or throw soft objects if the storyteller faltered. It became a game. Could the storyteller finish the tale without being booed off the stool? And finally, there was the deeply physical joy of movement itself. Wrestling matches were common in nearly every village, sometimes sanctioned by the church as harmless play, other times conducted in defiance of local authority. These weren't violent, but rough, sweaty, and full of laughter. No mats, no uniforms, just bare earth, clapping hands, and two grinning contenders. Tug of war, sack races, climbing greasy poles, and mock duels with inflated animal bladders all added to the repertoire of public contests. Winners earned bragging rights, losers got laughter, and often a drink or two. The late medieval period also saw the rise of specialized game books, collections of rules for various amusements, board games, counting games, dice games, and social challenges. Some books even contained instructions for feats of wit and merriment, essentially party tricks and riddles. These were copied, shared, and expanded across regions, forming a patchwork of play that crossed class and country. And so, entertainment in the medieval world was not static. It evolved, absorbed, and adapted. It was inventive and responsive. It used what was at hand, a sack, a fire, a story, a stage. It lived not in polished performances, but in the messy, communal, living heart of everyday life. The people of the Middle Ages didn't just endure. They played hard, they played wisely, and often they played together. So now, as the final embers of this story glow low, let yourself drift toward rest with a smile. Somewhere in a field long forgotten, laughter once rang through the night. A jester's bells jingled, a riddle found its answer. A pig chased through mud made a crowd weep with joy. And if joy can echo through centuries, then perhaps tonight it echoes for you. As our candle burns low and the echoes of medieval joy begin to fade gently into the hush, we arrive at a quieter, more reflective corner of this long, wandering tale. So far we've danced in village squares, laughed at puppet shows, paraded with mummers and fools. We've explored festivals, feasts, riddles, and rituals. But now, with the stars high above and the embers soft in their glow, we turn to something deeper, the memory of fun and the way it lingers even when laughter goes quiet. In the later Middle Ages, as Europe moved slowly toward the Renaissance, many of the amusements that once lived in fields and town squares began to take on new forms. With the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, entertainment, like knowledge, became more portable, more permanent. Books that once existed only as handwritten treasures in monastic libraries could now be reproduced, sold, and shared. And with that came the rise of a new kind of play, reading for pleasure. Stories that had once been told aloud, shaped by voice and memory, were now written down, preserved in ink and parchment. Tales of King Arthur, the romances of courtly love, the fabliaux of clever tricksters, all could be held in one's hands. People read in quiet nooks by firelight under blankets. Reading became both escape and ritual, a solo entertainment that nonetheless connected the reader to centuries of storytellers. At the same time, visual art began to shift. Where once stained glass and manuscript illumination had been the primary canvases of creativity, artists now turned to woodblock prints and paintings, often depicting scenes not just of saints and kings, but of everyday life. In these images we see peasants dancing, jesters leaping, lovers walking beneath trees. The art captured not only belief, but delight. Even music evolved. Though oral tradition remained strong, more melodies were now written down, preserved in neumes and notation, passed from abbey to abbey, from court to court. Secular songs flourished alongside sacred hymns, and across Europe, polyphony, the layering of voices in harmony, created new richness, like multiple hearts beating together. But not all fun was written, painted, or sung. Much of it still lived in the body, in gestures, in memory. Old games continued to be played, generation after generation. A stone tossed a certain way, a dance step known by heart, a rhyme whispered between siblings on a long walk home. These things weren't taught formally, they were inherited, and in that sense they were treasures too. And while grand festivals may have become more organized or regulated over time, their spirit endured. Maypoles were still raised, fires still burned on Midsummer's Eve, apples still bobbed in basins at All Hallows. Across shifting politics, plagues, and wars, the rhythms of joy persisted, because people insisted they must. In towns and cities, a new kind of public entertainment emerged, the permanent theatre. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, dedicated performance spaces began to appear. These were not just spaces for mystery plays or travelling troupes, but for scripted drama, often secular, often satirical, and increasingly sophisticated. Audiences came not just to be amused, but to be moved, challenged, and surprised. They laughed at fools, wept for tragic heroes, and watched reflections of their own lives unfold on stage. Theatre became a mirror, sometimes cracked, sometimes clear, but always alive. Even as new forms took shape, the essence of medieval fun, its earthiness, its creativity, its defiance, remained. Because at its core, fun in the Middle Ages wasn't just about entertainment, it was about resistance. In a world that could be cruel, unpredictable, and deeply unequal, joy became a rebellion. To laugh was to say, I am still here. To dance was to say, my body is mine. To sing was to say, I will not be silenced. To tell a story was to say, this matters. I matter. And so the legacy of medieval fun isn't just found in books or ballads. It's found in the very idea that human beings, no matter their time or burden, will always make room for beauty, for play, for a moment of wonder. Perhaps that's what makes this journey so enduring. When we look back at the past, it's easy to focus on the suffering, the plagues, the wars, the cold stone floors. But tonight we've walked a different path. We've seen the smiles between hardship, the games played with empty hands, the laughter that echoed off chapel walls, the quiet, glowing places where people chose joy. And now, as our story draws to a gentle close, I invite you to carry those images with you. A village green at dusk, a circle of dancers, a child's riddle, a soft song sung to no one in particular. These are not grand monuments, they are flickers, but together they light the way, because even now in our own, often noisy world, we still search for the same things, a reason to smile, a place to belong, a good story, well told. And so, in this final moment before sleep, I thank you for travelling this road with me, for listening, for remembering. May the joys of long ago warm your dreams tonight, and may you wake tomorrow with a heart just a little lighter. Good night. We're 715.09. Even now, as the long arc of our journey through medieval fun reaches its quietest hour, there is one more corner of that distant world worth exploring. One we've glimpsed in passing but not yet paused to understand. The joy of imagination. Because beyond the dances, beyond the puppet shows and riddles, there lived a subtler, quieter form of amusement. Dreaming. Not dreaming in sleep, though there was certainly magic in that, but the kind of dreaming done while awake. In stories told, myths repeated, visions believed, and the boundaries of the real softly bent. In the medieval world, imagination was not separate from daily life. It lived in the margins of belief and in the folds of ritual. It crept into conversation, coloured the way people saw the seasons, and whispered through the cracks in stone walls. It gave shape to things that could not be explained, and sometimes it made hardship feel survivable. One of the clearest expressions of this imaginative joy was in the stories people told, not just legends of saints or heroes, but the weird, whimsical, and wild tales shared late at night. Talking animals, trickster foxes, witches who flew on ladders, men who turned into wolves, townsfolk who danced themselves into the ground, entire villages who vanished into mist. These weren't always meant to be believed, but they weren't fully dismissed either. They existed in a space of possibility where belief and disbelief didn't fight each other, but coexisted. And in that space, wonder grew. Storytelling became an act of magic. The best storytellers weren't always the most educated or the loudest. They were the ones who could hold silence, who knew when to raise an eyebrow, when to pause before a punchline, when to lean in close and whisper, and no one knows if she ever came back. Even in monastic life, imagination found a home. Visions and dreams were recorded with reverence. Some monks and nuns wrote entire texts based on images they saw in sleep. Others described mystical unions with the divine, filled with fire, music, gardens, and light. These weren't distractions from faith. They were a part of it. Pilgrimage routes were rich with imagined stories. Shrines were often built where a saint was said to have cried, bled, or performed a miracle. Travellers believed in the power of a relic, a piece of cloth, a bone fragment, a lock of hair, because they carried the invisible into the visible. Every dusty mile on foot became a step deeper into a world where anything was possible. And then there were the dream books, compilations of symbols, omens, and interpretations. Dreamed of a white bird? It meant good news. A crumbling tower? Trouble ahead. To dream was to wander beyond the known world, and to return from that wander with something useful, or at least comforting. In households with access to books or storytelling traditions, children heard tales of far-off places, cities paved with gold, islands where the sun never set, forests full of speaking trees. Some believed in them, some only hoped. Either way, the telling was its own reward. This imaginative impulse didn't stay confined to tales or texts. It seeped into architecture, costume, and even maps. Medieval maps, especially the famed Mappa Mundi, weren't designed like our maps today. They didn't aim to be practical or geographically accurate. Instead, they were expressions of how people imagined the world. The edges of the known were ringed with marvels. Dog-headed men, giant birds, deserts that whispered, oceans that boiled. The world, in that view, was not a closed system. It was porous, strange, alive. Even in art, the imagination ran wild. Margins of prayer books filled with monkeys riding fish, snails fighting knights, or bishops kissing dragons. These weren't mistakes. They were creative bursts in otherwise orderly manuscripts. A kind of sideways smile from the scribe. A little window saying, yes, the world is serious, but not always. And in the grand cathedrals, those immense echoing halls of stone and glass, gargoyles leered and grinned from corners. Some were grotesque, others ridiculous. They were protectors, yes, but also tricksters, reminders that the sacred and the silly could coexist, carved in the same block of stone. Imagination also shaped how people saw time. Medieval calendars were more than dates. They were layered with symbols, saints, zodiac signs, and illustrations of seasonal life. Sowing seeds, gathering grapes, lighting fires. Time was not flat. It curved with light and shadow. It held story, and dreams weren't always personal. Sometimes they were collective. In moments of crisis, war, plague, famine, whole communities turned to prophecy. Traveling mystics, child seers, or even wandering animals might be believed to carry a message from beyond. These stories, true or not, helped people make sense of the senseless. They offered order when the world spun too fast. Imagination, then, was more than fun. It was a tool, a comfort, a candle in the dark. It allowed people to reshape their fears, soften their grief, and laugh at the chaos. It let them feel powerful, even if just for a moment. And most of all, it gave them stories. Stories to pass down, to remember, to hold. As you lie there now, in the soft stillness of your own time, you are part of that inheritance. You carry the same longing, for wonder, for mystery, for the spark that makes the world feel new. You've just walked through a world of mud streets and moonlight, of singing fools and dreaming monks, of riddles and roosters and roaring firelight. And through it all, one thread remained, the desire not just to live, but to imagine. So tonight, if you dream, may your dreams be rich. May they carry snippets of stories told long ago. May they bring you laughter, strangeness, and light. And if you wake smiling, may you remember that somewhere, in a time long past, someone else once dreamed the same. Good night, dreamer, and thank you for listening. And now, here we are, at the end, not of time or of memory, but of a story gently told across many quiet pages. A story not just of kings and kingdoms, but of dances, riddles, roaring laughter, and the soft flicker of imagination that lived even in the hardest centuries. We have wandered through village festivals, chased pigs through muddy lanes, listened to lutes in candlelit halls. We have seen jesters leap, children sing, and pilgrims dream. We've watched puppet shows and sacred plays, sipped ale with strangers in smoky taverns, and whispered riddles into the dark. And all along the way, we have been reminded of something very old and very simple, that people have always needed joy. Joy to survive, joy to belong, joy to make meaning when meaning feels far away. And now, having followed those trails through centuries, it's time to sit with what we've gathered. Because medieval fun wasn't just noise and spectacle. It wasn't only fire eaters and falcons and feasting. It was the daily art of resilience. It was making room for laughter when the fields were thin and the winters long. It was carving delight into the edges of a hard life. There's something humbling in that, isn't there? To know that, in a world without electricity, without anesthesia, without safety nets or vaccines, or even certainty about the shape of the earth, people still danced. And they didn't just dance. They wrote poems, they played jokes, they fell in love under archways, they passed secret notes, whittled toys, hummed melodies no one remembers now. They found light, and they carried it. And they passed it forward. They passed it through lullabies, through customs, through games taught from grandmother to granddaughter, through the stories we've just explored together, those strange, wild, warm little windows into their world. And perhaps that's why we still care, because when we ask, what did they do for fun back then? We're not just asking out of curiosity. We're asking something deeper. We're asking, were they like us? Did they laugh the way we laugh? Did they worry and ache and long to be seen? And the answer over and over is yes. Yes, they did. And maybe that's the real reason we tell these stories, not just to remember them, but to recognize ourselves, to see that even across centuries and languages and entire empires, we share the same fragile, beautiful need to feel joy, to tell tales, to feel the warmth of another person's smile. So as the final notes of this story settle around you, I hope you feel that connection, not just to the past, but to the human thread that winds through every century, every village, every campfire where a story was told and a song was sung. You are not so far away from them as it may seem. Their laughter was your laughter. Their wonder is your inheritance. So close your eyes now. Picture a village at night, soft with snow, a faint melody drifting from a distant window, the glow of lanterns, the hush of woolen cloaks, and beneath it all a heartbeat, the steady, joyful rhythm of life continuing, even in the cold. Let that warmth carry you. Let the bells and drums and old tales fold into your breath. And if, in your sleep, you find yourself walking through those ancient streets again, don't be surprised if someone offers you a riddle, or a ribbon, or a place in the circle dance. Take it. You've earned your place in the story. Good night, and thank you truly for listening.